Hello and welcome back to this Downflatustic Crusade. This video will be a brief overview of what I picked up at our most recent local record convention. As always, I like to go and peruse around the different booths because you never know what people are going to bring along. They usually bring some fantastic stuff that you could never possibly afford, but at least you can say you saw it at a record show once, and you can meet new people and talk about records and dig through endless bins and hopefully find some cool stuff. So I didn't really have a whole lot of luck or a lot of time, unfortunately, to go through this one, but I did manage to find one or two really nice gems that made it worthwhile going, and that's what you want to do. You want to get the fun of the experience, but you hope you find something really cool that, hopefully won't break your wallet, but, makes the trip worthwhile. And I was digging through a box of some random singles that were, mostly old promo singles and unmarked and such. And then I just happened to see this sticker on the generic white promo sleeve. And I'm like, hey, wait a minute. So I found the US promo of Moby's James Bond remix theme done for Tomorrow Never Dies. This is a really cool but very much promo US pressing, so it's in a generic sleeve with the sticker on here. This has a whole bunch of other mixes of the theme, of course being an electronic single, it's going to have tons of different mixes around and available. But in terms of it actually being available on vinyl, there's a couple different releases, but it's not something that's going to pop up every day, and particularly in this condition. It's on the standard Electra label, and it's 2 tracks per side. It's a standard 33 1/3 RPM speed, so it's not a 45 RPM COD. So it has 3 different versions and mixes, but it's also got Moby's version in what's credited as the extended mix, so it clocks in at almost 6 minutes. There are a number of different mixes of this track, and it's just so fun. It's iconic for 90s Bond. They used it in all the trailers and promotional materials for not just Tomorrow Never Dies, but for a number of years afterwards. So you've obviously you're going to have heard it, and you'll know it as soon as you do. But it was just a really cool find to get on vinyl, and it looks unplayed, which is really uncommon, for, again, anything that would have been used in a club scenario, and particularly for a Moby single. I mean, you don't find them ever where they look pristine, but otherwise it's just, again, a generic sleeve. So this is a really cool find, perfect for my never-ending Bond completist shelf. I always wanted to try and find this on vinyl, so now I have the extended cut on the US 12-inch promo. Then talking about expanded maxi singles, this one I've wanted to get for a long time. It doesn't have the original version of the song, which is probably my favorite song of this artist, but it has the custom version only on this 12-inch, and so I finally was able to get a copy of Prince's The Scandalous Sex Suite. So this is the 12-inch maxi single for Scandalous, the end title song for Batman 89. It's also in the Batman package of Prince singles, but this is a unique, completely new version of the song with Kim Basinger appearing, and so it has the Bat logo on the back, as do all the other matching Prince singles. This one doesn't pop up as much as, say, Bat Dance does, and some of the other Prince releases from the whole Batman project, and I just always wanted to find it because I really love Scandalous and the way it's placed over the end credits. Again, this is a custom version, so it's a totally different mix. The whole side 1 is, again, the Scandalous Sex Suite, and it has some nice B-sides. It has this nice shot from the original music video, and it's still in the shrink wrap, so it still has the Warner Brothers also available on compact disc maxi single sticker that you'll see on a number of Warner Brothers singles in terms of 12-inch singles. You'll see that little sticker on a lot of Warner singles from the late 80s. Of course, it is a top loader, like a lot of the Depeche Mode singles from this time period. It's just on the standard Warner Brothers label. It's credited, or it's got handwritten stampers with a handwritten master disc and DMM indicating it's a direct metal master. I would have to assume, like a lot of Prince's material from the 80s specifically, that the vinyl will sound better than the CD version. I don't have any other version of this particular mix, but for for example, you have to do research and figure out what actually used the master tapes and what used copy tapes. There's a good history of that with Prince releases where the vinyl was better than the CD because the vinyl was cut from original tapes and the CDs were cut from copy tapes. So there's always a chance of that continuing with some of the singles. I'm not sure who mastered this. There's no indication in the dead wax. Yeah, there's no indication of who mastered this, but what also really drew me was the fact that for a Prince single, this is in exceptionally good shape. The sides are both extremely clean, and I have a couple other Prince singles. They're never clean. They were always well loved and played to death. So that was a real surprise to finally find this, not only in good shape, but still in the original shrink wrap. So getting any Prince singles for under $10 is already difficult to do these days. So I was finally able to chip further off the Prince collection wish list and everything tied into Batman 89. Top loader! Why did they do this? It is difficult to do one-handed on camera. Top loader! Now, the last two are both soundtracks, or, well, one is half of a soundtrack, I should say. And this one, it's one of the most iconic soundtracks of all time, but I have always tried to find a clean original pressing. And there's, of course, both a mono and a stereo issue. Finding an original clean pressing of this is not an easy task, so I swore to myself if I ever found a clean, inexpensive copy, I would try it. So I was able to finally get a clean original stereo pressing of Mancini's classic Pink Panther score. This on the RCA label. This is the stereo pressing, and it is an original RCA Dynagroove pressing. That was RCA's patented new process of trying to cut better records, and there's a whole blurb about it down here, and it actually goes into detail, like it actually says, better clarity, and we actually tried to get rid of inner groove distortion, and it actually says that on there. But this is how you will differentiate the original pressings from the later 1970s pressings, for example. And this is a really great jacket because you have, a really nice vintage design, but it's also got the cheeky liner notes technically credited to being written by Peter Sellers himself. So there's a nice bit of humor, so it's a must for fans of the series. It's also really great that this cover actually still has the original laminate on the front of it, so it's still got that high gloss feel, which I was really surprised. There's a little bit of ring wear, but it's held up really well. There's a little bit of browning and the edge is a little frayed, but it's one of the better jackets I've seen of an original pressing in really a long time. I always glance at copies of this when I find it, trying to see if it's a clean original, and usually they're beat to heck or it's the later repressings. It's still got the original RCA inner, which is really nice, and it's also, a custom inner. It's not one just showing a bunch of album cover pictures. So that's another nice touch and another good indication that when the original inner's intact without any seam splits or anything, that the record inside will not only be original but in really nice shape. And here it is on the original RCA Stereo Dynagroove label, complete with the classic dog logo. And as you can see, this is in really clean shape. There's a little bit of scuffing on either side, but it is very, very minor. Again, the labels on both sides are exceptionally clean. This is one of the cleanest examples I've ever seen of this particular album because, again, this was a very popular album almost since its original release. It went through a number of different printings in both 1963 and 1964. And so the chances of finding one of these in clean shape is already difficult, but finding one in clean shape with a good cover and for a cheap price, much more difficult. So I am really excited to check this out. I want to compare it to my 1970s RCA copy. There's been a number of audiophile reissues, I think with the best of them being regarded as the Analog Productions 45 RPM version, which I really want to check out. I think it's still in print, but it is a bit pricey. But I've always heard a lot of great stuff about these original Dynagroove pressings, so I can't wait to check this out. I don't think this is a first stamper, though, because in the dead wax, it ends in 7S, so I think this is a later stamper. I think the very first copies are 1S's and 2S's, but again, I'm just having to glance at Discogs pages. I didn't see this copy listed anywhere, but it is an original because it is a Dynagroove pressing on the original Dynagroove label with the original cover and inner, but I think it's just a slightly later stamper because, again, showing the popularity of this album already in 1963. So, again, I just can't believe I finally found a clean one of these, and it was only 350. So it's like it was a good time to be at the record show because they're ever since the resurgence, and especially since I've been going to some of the shows after the pandemic had started to lift. They've had a couple shows, and each one there's been so many new vinyl collectors and record buyers since they really got into it during lockdowns. It's driven up demand even more, so prices have gone through the roof again. So I was seeing a lot of things that, were significantly more expensive compared to the last record show that was a couple months ago. So it's getting more and more difficult to get into record collecting because of the expense and supply and demand, and even getting new vinyl because the pressing plants can't keep up with demand, so everything's on constant back order. So it's very nice to find something you've been looking for a long time that's in really great shape, but is also at a more old-fashioned price. And by that I mean 5 or 10 years ago price when I really got much more heavy into record collecting, and back when it didn't quite murder your wallet yet. So this was a wonderful find, and I do encourage any fans of Mancini or the Pink Panther films, or if you love soundtracks and you have you're getting into vinyl, if you can find an original pressing, one of these original Dynagroove pressings, they are really fantastic. But again, the tricky part is finding them in good shape at a good price. So its condition is key on this. And I would like to check out a mono pressing as well, because I've heard a lot of good stuff about that. But I think it might be a fold down of the stereo because this is a stereo recording, but it would be cool to check out nonetheless. And then lastly is the only record I had gotten recently that was not at the record show. So those three were what I picked up at the record show, and then this one I had found just in my general travels, and it's a really fantastic one that's also not super common because it's a slightly later reissue. But I was able to find a very nice condition copy of the 1961 Columbia reissue of the Miles Davis album entitled Jazz Track. So originally this was released in late 1958 with a different cover. This is a slightly later reissue from about 1961 or so, if my research is correct, because I had to do some Discogs digging and so on and so forth. It appears to be the same pressing as the 1958 version, or maybe just a slightly later stamper. But this is, of course, side one is the soundtrack that Miles recorded for the masterpiece, just unbelievably impactful film Elevator to the Gallows, which of course has a number of different titles, and here you can see was renamed Frantic for a later US release. And I guess this release or reissue was why they put this album out with this different cover and advertising the new American title slightly after they originally released it a couple years before. Again, the album itself seems to be the same, and side one is the main selections from the soundtrack, and then side two is actually a recording with of an entirely different session, but it's actually the majority of the same band lineup that would then go in to do Kind of Blue and become the landmark of jazz history that it is. So it's a brilliant linkage to the most famous period of Miles Davis's career and sound, but it's obviously not a full soundtrack. The soundtrack is side one. Side two is a completely different session. Then after this point, this album was sort of split up, and you eventually had the various releases of the Elevator to the Gallows soundtrack by itself, and then you had a separate release under a different title of the actual session here, which I think, if I'm remembering it correctly, was just called like Miles 1958 or something. I might be misremembering that, but it had a different title. And so the Jazz Track album itself went out of print, and so this is much more of a an element of the LP release history. I think that Columbia, or I should say Sony, recreated it for one of their CD boxes. So you can get Miles Davis box set of Columbia albums, and one of them is a recreation of the Jazz Track version. So I think this is now finally available on CD, but only in one of those limited boxes. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure they did that. And as far as I'm aware, the only difference between the soundtrack selections on this compared to the eventual standalone release of the complete score, or mostly complete score, is that that is the film recording, and this is the film recording, but it's got some reverb added to it. So this is basically like a unique mix on side one of those tracks from the score itself. So I do think this is important as a piece of the history of Miles Davis releases, but also for the particular mix of these tracks and the way that this sounds. So again, this is a really nice piece, and you don't see this particular cover all the time. I had seen a picture of it somewhere before and then sort of forgot about it. And then I was just flipping through a bin and all of a sudden saw this. And I'm like, wait a minute, Jazz Track has a different cover. And then I had to think for a second, and it jogged my memory. The other great thing about this, of course, being 61, is it is still on the iconic 6i label. So this is a really nice condition Miles 6i to add to my collection. So I'm getting closer to hopefully one day having nice original 6i copies of the main Miles albums from this period. And this one, it doesn't get talked about as much because, again, it's technically sort of a half soundtrack, so it's sort of a compilation album, and this is a reissue jacket. But again, the LP seems to be the same as the original 1950s pressing. In terms of the dead wax, this ends in 2AJ on side 1, and then it ends in 2E on side 2. Again, I'm having to guess, but it seems like this might just be a slightly later stamper from the original 1950s pressing, but it seems otherwise the same and is still on the original 6i label. So they may have just updated the jackets, and the LP is roughly the same. It doesn't seem to affect the value all that much. If you look for original 6i copies of this album and you're looking on eBay or Discogs, they all seem to vary around the same pricing, whether it's the original cover or this one. So I don't know if the original is more valuable or what have you, but it is just not something you see every day. Nice, clean examples of 6i Miles Davis material, and the surfaces on this are in really great shape. There are the occasional scuffs, but this is definitely one of the cleanest original Miles Davis pressings that I have. I have now about 3 or 4 different ones. I never even thought I would have one, so it's just amazing that I've found another one. So this is definitely the crown jewel of my latest acquisitions. By the way, if you've never seen Elevator to the Gallows, please go and see it. It's a masterpiece, and this is one of the greatest film scores of all time. So that's it for my recent record acquisitions. Again, not much, but some really cool pieces. So it's always good to go to your local record convention when you have the time and dig around, and to always dig through any crate or bin or store section that you can, because again, you never know what's going to pop up there. And all of these were great, nice, wonderful surprises that were all inexpensive. Like none of these were the marked up prices that you see a lot of times now. So it was very refreshing to find some really cool pieces in great shape, some of which I had looked for a long time, and not have to pay through the nose for them. So again, always keep an eye out and always be ready to dig through yet another bin of records. So that's it for this video. I just want to say, keep supporting your local independent record stores. Visit any record conventions you might have in your area if you get the chance. It's a really cool and fun experience if you haven't been to one before. Keep your turntables spinning, and thanks ever so much for watching.